Oh, well, you're not going anywhere.
Good morning, everyone. I see people beginning to populate our room here now. As is tradition, if you could go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat box and say where you're joining us from. I see a lot of repeat names. So just go ahead and make sure when you are addressing the chat box that you choose the drop down and do your message to all panelists and attendees. That way your peers as well as us are able to see where you're joining from. Hi, Peg. Good to see you again. Erica, good to see you again. Lots of repeat names here. Linda. Oh, and Tad from Queens. Awesome. Well, as you guys are going in the chat box and just letting us know where you're joining from, one thing I want to do really quickly here is launch a poll. So you'll see it in the middle of your screen. If you can go ahead and choose what your role is within your program. Great. Okay, so you guys can see this now. We have a number of instructors here, which is wonderful, and different individuals probably within the leadership positions within their program, which is wonderful. So as you guys know, my name is Gina Davis, and I'm an education program specialist with the Maryland Department of Labor. This is day 3 now of our virtual training institute, and we have the privilege of Tad and Katie joining us from Voxy. I think your name of your company has slightly changed, right? So you'll probably touch that in a minute, but they're from Voxy. They have tremendous expertise in ESL content development, which I'm sure they're also going to introduce, their credentials in a second. But I'm really excited to share this with you because there is an opportunity for, if programs see something that they're interested in, they're more than welcome to reach out to Katie and Tad directly and, hear more information. But we hope that this is a wonderful teaser that sort of wets your whistle and sees what the possibilities are in terms of serving our students and their career goals. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Katie and Tad, and we hope you enjoy.
Thank you so much. Yes, there we go. Tad and I are both here from, it's close enough, from VoxyEngen. I'm our founder and chief education officer, and Tad is the director of partnership development. Just to give you a little bit of background, I started my career about 24 years ago, teaching English on an apple orchard to Mexican migrant workers, and I've been doing that ever since. So my PhD is in second language acquisition from the University of Maryland, and I had the chance to work for about 10 years in higher ed and for the US government, doing research on how to use technology for language learning. About 10 years ago, I left and started working at a company called Voxy, where I got to build a platform that lets us deliver English language content at scale to adult learners. And about 2 years ago, I founded this new organization. And what we do is help underserved populations in the US, immigrants and refugees, get access to the English they need for their career goals, for their personal goals, to help their children. Everything is based in research, everything is tracked. And what we're here today to talk to you about is just best practices that Tad and I have from our combined decades of experience working with immigrants and refugees and adult learning, and how to build online language programs. And I will let Tad introduce himself here.
Hi, so good morning, everyone. Tad Wamester from the VoxyEngen team. I have been working with immigrants and refugees on their career integration, upskilling programs for about 13 years. I've done some work in Maryland as well when I was with my former organization, Upwardly Global, collaborating with the IRC in Silver Spring, and also the Skilled Immigrant Integration Task Force, collaborating with programs in Maryland, whether it's the EARN program or the Tech Hire program. So really excited to be thinking about how you can support career pathways for English language learners in Maryland, and looking forward. Please share your questions because I will be manning the chat. So feel free to chat to panelists so that I can make sure that this is interactive.
Yes, please. We do not want to just lecture at you for an hour. So we're going to talk a little bit about online teaching and then talk about virtual language teaching and then go through some real world examples. And Tad and I will take turns, but if you could please send in questions as you have them, we will address them as we go. So the first thing I'd like to start with, and it's something that many of you probably learned this past spring when many people were forced into online teaching with little or no preparation, is that online courses are different. And we know from decades of research that they should not try to be a copy of the face-to-face classroom. Instead, in an ideal world, an online experience will solve some of the problems that we have in face-to-face classes. So if you do nothing else, but you think about a virtual program or an online program and you think, what can I do with technology that I couldn't do face-to-face? You're already on the right foot. You're setting yourself up for success. And the other big thing you can do to set yourself up for success is not create too much work for yourself. And this is something that most veteran online teachers realize. You have wonderful ideas and then all of a sudden realize, wait, that means I need to talk to every single student individually on the phone 3 times a week. How is that going to work? Or you have students engage in activities and you need to monitor all their work and it's way too much work for you. So keeping those 3 things in mind when you're thinking about setting up an online course are 3 really important best practices. After you've gone through those first 3 things, don't make too much work for yourself and appreciate that the online environment is different. The next big key for successful online learning is understanding that community is super important. We know that community is important for everything. People need to feel like they belong to a group. And it's especially important when everyone is staggered all over the place. They need to understand that they're still part of a classroom. So if you want to have a successful online course, you really need to start with building trust, collaboration, and engagement. Before you get to whatever it is you're teaching, you need to make sure your learners understand that they're part of a community. And then we come back to the same theme. Don't make this too hard on yourself or your learners. The big temptation with online instruction is to choose like the coolest new technology or the newest tools or have learners do something in a complicated way. Don't do that. Leverage the technology that your learners are already using because then you're not going to create more barriers to their being able to engage with the group. I mentioned taking advantage of technology. Here are some of the things that we know technology does that help solve real classroom problems. Technology can offer individualized instruction, whether that's done through a formal program or that's done because you have learners seek out materials and content that's important to them, because you have learners bring their own materials they're working with in English to your online classroom. You're able to personalize instruction much more easily with technology than you are in a traditional environment. And it also offers access to authentic materials. So often in the classroom, it's the teacher and the students. But if you're using technology, you have access to anything that's on the internet and authentic experiences as well. As the whole world has moved online, we've found more and more things that we do virtually that we didn't do virtually before. Right now, everyone's having virtual holiday parties using some software called Rally, where you're in little groups and you can hear chitter chatter from other people all around you. There are so many things that we can engage in, not in exactly the same way, but sort of the same way virtually, and bringing those experiences to your learners lets them integrate English into their real world lives, which is what you want to do in an online English class. It also, something that's important to point out, technology lets us record our interactions. So one of the things that's really difficult for language learners is paying attention to everything at once. It's super high cognitive load. Learning a language, you need to remember what you're trying to say, how to say it in the new language, what the new person is saying back to you. But if you have the opportunity to record yourself and view yourself afterwards and get feedback from teachers and peers on your performance, that's a benefit that technology makes really easy for us to do in online classes. So these are just a few things. A really important practice for teachers when you're teaching online is to pay attention. Learners don't do what you want them to do, and you need to work with what they are doing. So by paying attention, you can see what they've done and what they haven't done. And they're much more likely to engage in the assignments and activities you set out for them if they know you're going to check their work. If they think it's an optional thing to do, they won't do it. And it's not through any fault of their own, but we're all busy. And most ESL students in the United States are working adults, and working adults prioritize the things that are most important. So when you're going through your to-do list at the end of the day and there's an optional assignment that your teacher asked you to do that no one's going to look at, you're going to get 4% of the people who actually turn that assignment in. And we see this over and over in every educational setting around the world. When I'm teaching graduate students, when they come to class, if it's not a grade and I talk about the reading the night before, half of them haven't done the reading. So one thing that technology can let you do is actually see what students do, and you can use that information to inform your teaching practice and also inform how you set up your online classes.
And Katie, let's take a moment to pause and launch some of those first 2 polls. I think, Gina, you have to launch those.
Yeah, hold on one second. Okay, can you guys see that one now?
So this is thinking back. Did you find yourself in the position of creating emergency online courses earlier this year?
Probably some people did. I just assumed everyone did, but we'll find out.
Some people more prepared than others, I guess. I noticed we also have a number of individuals from the Department of Corrections, so they didn't necessarily have access to technology to do so. Okay. Great. So now everyone can see the results from this one.
So most people, or the about two thirds, did have to launch an emergency online course.
And a few people had online courses already, which is great. It was much easier for people to move online in the spring if they already had materials that were set up that way.
And also the next question, let's dig in there before moving on.
Okay, great.
So what were your biggest struggles in teaching online and administering online courses? If you haven't voted, vote right now. Students didn't have the technology for online classes. That was a comment that came in and is very true.
Yes, it is.
Shared devices.
Right. And a lot of people had students who, these were all problems clearly, but a lot of people had students who didn't understand the technology. And this is sort of gets at that early best practice, which is use the technology your students have. It's easier to say than to do, but if you can find a way to meet your students where they are with whatever it is, whether it means you're sending them WhatsApps or text messages or Facebook messages, just to get them engaged, and then you can move from there to something else. But finding a way to reach them is super hard.
And I think that's one of the reasons why we prioritized English for digital literacy as a new course that we're developing to teach some of those basic email, computer skills, digital literacy skills that we know adult students really need to succeed.
They do. And it's a lot easier to teach those digital literacy skills first and then get into whatever it is you're trying to teach, because learners will have much more access to materials. So I'm glad we did those 2 polls there, because the best practices we've pulled out really align with what the crowd is struggling with. You want to design for the online environment if you find yourself in the position of designing an online course. Establishing community is important, and leveraging technology, but also making sure your students have access to it and that you can use something that they can use. And then those last 2 really go together. You don't want to make too much work for yourself. It's already more work than teaching face-to-face when you're teaching things online, and it's exhausting. And pay attention to what your students are doing, because otherwise you won't be able to help them. So we now want to talk, those were all sort of best practices for online teaching in general, whether you're teaching language classes, ESL classes, integrated education and training classes. But using that framework for best practices for teaching online, I really wanted to get into how virtual language teaching fits into this. And the first thing to know, and you all know this if you're an ESL teacher, is that English training is acquiring a skill, not studying a content area. And this is an important distinction because what this means is that all of the best practices for skill acquisition apply for language teaching. Things like let adults learn by doing, and not everybody is going to get it right away. And practice is what learners should be focused on. And learners need lots and lots of examples of the language they're learning. So rather than approaching language like teaching a content area, when you can approach it based on learners' needs, you make progress much faster. Instead of teaching people how the language works and grammar rules and when to use the third person S, teach them the language they need to do real things. If you look at the last 40, 50 years of research on how second language acquisition works, and you take all of those researchers and you put them into a room, they will very happily spend the rest of their lives arguing over why their little teeny tiny piece of academia is different from yours and why their theory makes more sense. And if you filter out all that noise, what you find is that for language learning to work, you need 4 things. You need access to input. So adults need lots and lots of examples of the language they're learning. They need to read them. They need to watch people doing them in videos. They need to listen to them, and they need it over and over and over again, different examples. They also need output. So they need the chance to produce the language themselves. They need the opportunity to interact with other people, and they need feedback on error. So when you're building an online language course, making sure it has those 4 components is really critical. A framework that works really well for adults, for integrated education and training, for thinking about pre-apprenticeship programs and getting English language pathways for adult learners is task-based language teaching. This is the opposite of teaching everyone the words for apple and banana and book and airplane and hoping they'll be able to use English. Here you start with the real world tasks that learners actually need to be able to accomplish, and you work backwards. So somebody working in a customer service context would get the language they needed to handle more elevated calls so that they could get promoted and move on. Somebody working in a factory context might get the language they need to operate a forklift so that they could then get the certification to be a forklift operator. But you start with a real world need and work backwards. We were talking about best practices for online learning. Whether your course is completely online or involves the face-to-face component, a blended approach works best. We know this from decades of research. And what this means is that there should be some element of your course that involves real-time communication with another human being. It shouldn't all just be asynchronous self-study. And you want to use software for what technology can do best, so people can do what humans do best. Fundamentally, language is a tool that we use to communicate with other people, and we can't take people out of the equation. We need to practice communicating. The right thing is different for everyone. If I needed to teach all of you how to ride a bike, and I started by lecturing at you about how to ride a bike, and I gave you diagrams to fill out about how to ride a bike, and some days I let you practice on an exercise bike in the classroom very, very quickly. And we watched videos of people riding bikes, and we learned all the words for the different bike parts. And then we spent like a month on balance and the principles of balance and how balance works. And then I told you with the diagram, step by step, what to do for how to ride a bike. This is very similar to how a lot of language learning works. And then I sent you outside and gave everyone a bike after like 6 months of this bike lecture. First of all, no one would be able to actually ride a bike. And second of all, everybody would make different mistakes. Some people would fall over. Some would sort of get the balance right, but not be able to use the pedals. Some would turn the bike the wrong direction and have no idea how to use it. Some would not understand how the brakes worked. So when you're teaching someone a skill, the right thing really is different for everyone. So the more personal you can make what you're doing and the more feedback you can give to learners that's tailored to their needs, the better it goes.
And Katie, I was just speaking, this slide makes me think of a conversation I had this morning with an adult education program in Ohio who had a foreign trained lawyer in her class who was not going to pursue recertification, legal practice in the US. But I thought, what are some of the transferable skills that they might work on improving their language around, their English skills around research, around human resources, and business and workplace communications, customer service. There are so many skills that she could pursue that would help her to use her transferable skills and find a career path that can allow her to really feel like she's making a meaningful contribution and achieving employment that meets her economic goals as well.
Exactly. And this is also something that can happen in ESL classes. Often language learners, I spent a few years teaching ESL actually at Prince George's Community College before I got my PhD. And one of the things that struck me about my classes is that not only would I have immigrants from all over the world, they would have different levels of formal education, they would have different career goals, but they were never really asked what they wanted before those classes started. And if you can give learners a sense of agency and have them understand that they don't just go sit in ESL 102 to get English, but that English is something that they need to work on as well, and that it should be personalized. They should bring in materials they're struggling to read. They should talk to the teacher about what they want to be able to do. Because if we can help people understand that they should use all of their skills that they already have and the things they're interested in learning and incorporate all of that into their English training program, A, they make progress much more quickly, and B, they're able to leverage all of the skills they bring with them as adults, often with prior training, to whatever career pathway they find themselves on. So we mentioned that we should use software for what technology can do best, so humans can do what people do best. And what this happens with when we come to online language learning, what this comes down to is really helping learners interact with other speakers, whether it's through conversation partners, whether it's with other students in the same class, whether it's with the teacher, but finding a way to use technology like the technology we're using right now for this virtual training institute to let people practice using the language. Other things that we can do with technology are individualized instruction, giving people access to the materials that make sense for them based on their needs and goals. Authentic experiences. Learners are already using technology to do things like find their way, get directions, listen to music. Music is a wonderful one because music is one of the few things that learners will agree to listen to over and over again. It helps with their pronunciation. They almost always want to sing along. And if you can let them find music they like in English, it really helps with their comprehension when they're having conversations with people with different accents. Real world materials is one of the best things we can use for technology for language learning, bringing in examples of people using English to do real things rather than the scripted dialogues you find in most textbooks. I mean, a big one that we've all found is that technology can resolve issues of space and time. Your learners can participate in conversation classes around the clock. They can meet with each other whenever it's convenient. You can schedule time with them, whether it's synchronous time together or just communicating asynchronously when they're able and when you're able, opening up opportunity for more communication. And integrating language learning with things learners are already doing is a great thing to do with online language classes. Have them bring examples in of how they've used Google Docs, when they read something on Twitter, when they tweeted something they posted on Facebook, a LinkedIn profile that they would like to emulate, and use those real examples in your classes. Using the data that you can get from virtual instruction to improve instruction is critical. So when you're teaching English face-to-face, you often have no idea if learners are paying attention, if they understand what you're saying, if they understand each other. Your opportunities for measuring that happen when there's a test, or if you happen to observe a learner communicating. But if you're working with software that can help you track what learners are doing in real time, you can see where they're struggling and you can make interventions there, human-generated interventions, when they make the most sense for learners. So the instructional design process I've been talking about is really integrated. You need to establish community. Then you want personalized practice based on learners' needs. Integrate authentic experiences. Review learner data. And then you can build collaborative activities that leverage both practice and experience. And I mentioned earlier that learners don't do what we want. This is a nice segue after the integrated activities. So we need to work with what they are doing. When you make online English classes relevant and personalized, learners are more likely to pay attention. We know that adults don't pay attention to things that are not interesting to them or relevant to them, So the more interesting and relevant and important you can make the work you do with learners, and the more closely you can tie it to their own real world goals and real world outcomes, the better those outcomes are. To do that, you really need to start with a needs analysis. So start by finding out who your students are, why do they need to learn English, what materials do they need to understand, what tasks do they need to complete, and your learners can help you do it. You can use survey tools, or you can sit with them in a class, or you can meet with them in virtual sessions and ask them these questions and have them create lists of things they want to be able to do in English so that you can orient your classes around their real world goals. And then after your class, you want to take a look at what actually happened. So the single biggest predictor of success in an online class is time on task. The amount of time that learners spend engaging with language learning will be the biggest predictor of how much language they'll actually learn. You also want to measure that in concert with, can they do what you taught them? What were their test scores like? Has their English proficiency improved in conversations you've had with them? You want to look at how satisfied they are with the English program. Do they think it worked? And then real world success. If you start with a needs analysis and you ask learners, why are you learning English? What do you want to be able to do? And then you track that, then you can demonstrate not only that your class worked, but that teaching learners English can improve their economic outcomes. It can improve their real world goals. It can improve their integration goals. Making sure that learners are using English to do something and tracking what they're doing is the best evidence that your program has been successful.
And in workplace ESL programs, when you think about it, the employee engagement, their motivation in the workplace, their actual mood coming to work is really something that can demonstrate that they are improving their English, that they're feeling more confident in the workplace, and pursuing training and advancement opportunities.
Exactly. We're going to get into some real world examples. And before that, I just wanted to review everything we've talked about. So I've said it a bunch of times, online classrooms are different from their face-to-face counterparts. You want to take advantage of the benefits of technology for language learning and not make things too hard on yourself or your students. When you can link collaborative work to real world practice, you drive outcomes, and the technology you're using should be able to report those for you. That way you can design assignments so everyone pays attention, because teaching the right thing is different for every learner, and digital instruction can actually help us move away from one size fits all, which might be better known as one size fits none. So how does this work in practice? I'm going to let Tad take over and talk to us about that.
And I think this is an opportunity for our next poll. So let's pause for 1 second.
Okay, let's see here. Okay, launching now.
So what are your biggest challenges with virtual career pathway programs in the virtual space? Just wanted to make sure that that was very virtual. So feel free to select more than one option for challenges with building virtual career pathway programs.
So you have lots of variety, lots of all of the aboves. I'll share in just a moment.
Not surprising.
Okay, so everyone can see.
Okay, so there doesn't seem to be a shortage of challenges. I'm not surprised that hands-on experience, whether it's practicals and, medical profession or other skilled trades that require that hands-on experience. It's such a challenge. I just saw New America putting out a report on that, but it's not surprising that that is a huge challenge in programs, but we've heard about recruitment, retention, assessment, and curriculum development, all being barriers to creating these virtual IET and career pathway programs. So, for many years, there has been, discussion of upskilling, reskilling of both incumbent workers and job seekers. One of the major challenges for English language learners is, do they have the requisite level to join a program. Often there is a minimum, whether it's an intermediate level of English that would be required for them to enter either an incumbent worker training program or a technical training program. And so how do we overcome that barrier? And this is especially important right now. We know that immigrant communities have been disproportionately affected by job losses, by work as essential workers in the healthcare space. So I'm calling this radical reskilling is needed to support adult learners whose jobs have been negatively impacted, who need new, safety and training or cross training. And many of the career pathway programs, whether it's in hospitality or food and beverage, may not be seeing the strong demand that we're seeing in e-commerce and warehousing and healthcare. So it's an important time to really think about what are the career pathway programs that will help your learners get a job, get ahead. And these are some of the terms that we use to refer to these upskilling and reskilling programs, building bridges or on-ramps into career and technical training programs. I'm very excited about the potential within pre-apprenticeship programs that give some of that vocational language acquisition that will allow someone to move into an earn and learn opportunity. And then there's an ongoing focus on integrated education and training programs, bringing language and skills development alongside technical training programs that lead to a career pathway, a certification, and again, employment. So Voxy and VoxyEngen has an incredibly unique approach to transforming real-world content into language lessons that leverage, those videos, audio clips, news articles, industry-specific training materials, pulling out the keywords that those learners need to access and build into their vocabulary to be able to succeed in a training program. And the platform actually generates literally hundreds of personalized activities by proficiency level that is also based on their performance and is interactive. And this can be rapidly deployed into the Voxy platform. You'll see this is an example of taking an article around COVID-19 vaccine, pulling out the keywords, and this is coming from the real media section in the Voxy platform, which actually brings current events into language learning. This is another example in more detail about how a reading activity and reading and listening comprehension is integrated into the Voxy platform. Learners are engaging with those vocabulary words throughout their experience completing Voxy lessons. And these are just some of the examples of the career pathway programs, the career pathway courses that are in the VoxyEngen platform. We're always adding new career pathways. I was just talking about this morning that the English for patient care and support is the next career pathway course that is slated for release in the coming weeks, supporting individuals with accessing medical assisting training, patient care technician, career fields that are growing in demand and hiring now and into the future. And actually, this is an opportunity for the next poll. So let's launch that. So what career pathway sectors are most in demand for your students and community? And feel free to choose more than one. If there's another sector or career pathway that you're looking to build Feel free to chat that in to the full group. Real estate sales, teaching and education. Yep. So just take another moment or two to answer the poll. Early education and childcare, ABE, GED, ESL community with Chesapeake College. Warehouse, we have an Amazon warehouse. Okay, so let's close the poll. Okay, so healthcare definitely was a very common response. Not surprising, technology, manufacturing, construction, transportation, logistics, as well as customer service. And that is actually an excellent segue to the fact that recently Voxy built some new courses for that warehousing and e-commerce career pathway. We know that there are jobs in this area, and many of our adult learners are looking for employment. So this can support their language acquisition that lines up with that e-commerce and warehousing career pathway, introduction to warehouse machinery, thinking about the safety concerns around operating a forklift and other types of machinery, not only ensures a safe workplace, but also helps those individuals connect with career advancement opportunities. Healthcare. This is an example from our English for Certified Nursing Assistants course, which is an in-demand profession. Even when learners and students get a job in this area, the stronger their language skills are, the more career pathways, the more career advancement opportunities that are open to them. Whether it's a leadership or training role, whether it's opening up additional allied health certification programs that they could participate in. So even when someone gets a job as a certified nursing assistant, the stronger their language skills are, the more career advancement opportunities. And we know that in many of these career pathway programs, what we hear is the content gets too difficult too fast. So learners need additional support with that vocational language acquisition. They need to understand some of those roles, responsibilities. So this is just another good example of supporting career pathway programs. And Katie, it's back to you.
Yes. So, and one thing I'll add to the, try to turn my camera back on. One thing I'll add to the allied healthcare is that we've been working with a number of different partners across the country on creating allied healthcare pathways for immigrants and refugees to get into everything from certified nursing assistant to medical coders to dental assistants. And we can really take that online, take the career specific content that comes directly from a training program and then create a version of it to be an English on-ramp, to help with those 4 areas Tad mentioned earlier, to create pre-apprenticeship programs and on-ramps. What we use is an administrative tool that lets us see how engaged learners are with the content, and we can go in and see what courses and units they're finishing. This was a general purpose ESL course, but you can see people using the English you need to access social services, for technology, for making plans, for forms and personal information. And by finding out what my learners are doing in the platform, I can design my classroom activities around that. Another thing I wanted to point out here is just that when we were talking about real examples and leveraging data, we can look at the learners who improve their proficiency and maintain their proficiency if they're intermediate learners, and we can see predictors of that by looking at how well they do in the platform. I talked before about measuring multiple outcome variables. And when you use technology that can track what your students are doing, you can get an idea in advance of how they're doing so that you can intervene just in time and help them. If you see students struggling with specific parts of language learning, you can go in and help them where they need help, which is much more likely to result in proficiency improvements, helping learners get the score they need on CASAS or TABE or whatever standardized test is being used to gate their way into career training. So we wanted to give a few examples of how our platform has been used in different workforce development programs with incumbent workers and job seekers. This data here actually comes from the University of Maryland. This was with a pilot project that's now been expanded, working with their residential facilities workers and looking at learners who were getting access to it through their employers, learners with limited English proficiency who used the platform 4 hours a month, 6 hours a month, 4 hours a month over the holidays last year and improved their proficiency as a result of this. It was so successful that the university has now expanded it to be used with more residential facilities workers and limited English proficiency workers. But it's an example of how employers can think about using their training and development dollars to help upskill incumbent workers to then be able to promote them from within. These are often workers who are limited for promotion and advancement just because they don't have the English skills, but not because they're not hardworking employees who are dedicated, who've been there for a long time. We saw something similar in New York State at the Chobani Yogurt Factory. This was with a group of factory floor workers, so the very lowest level employee in the factory who had almost no English literacy skills at all. Most of them were Burmese refugees. This was a project that was actually funded by the Workforce Development Institute of New York, but the employer agreed to give a pay raise to the employees when they improved their proficiency. So everybody sort of had some skin in the game. It gets back to the whole feeling like you're part of a community and paying attention. And we saw every single one of those pilot participants get a pay raise, and also several of them got promoted from being factory floor workers to forklift operators because they got the English skills they needed to be able to do that real world promotion and advancement in the workplace. The last example I'll give before I turn it back over to Tad is that our platform has a proficiency assessment embedded in it, but we know that most programs rely on tests that will report on the NRS scale for their funding. And this was a group of workforce-focused English language learners at Queens Public Library in New York. What we saw here is that the ones who had access to our platform for personalized career-specific learning improved their NRS levels significantly more than the ones who didn't. So we're able to show that this targeted intervention, which gives people real-world English at the right time, aligned to their goals and career interests, can really drive the proficiency improvement that will let them get into career training programs. Tad, this is you.
So yeah, the Welcoming Center for New Pennsylvanians, they're an interesting and innovative workforce development organization in Philadelphia that focuses on serving New Pennsylvanians, immigrants and refugees. This program had a focus on supporting digital literacy as well as career exploration. So learners, they spent the first couple weeks of the class really focusing on some basic computer skills, digital literacy concepts, email, then moved on to having more freedom to work with the Voxy tool for career exploration. Different learners were pursuing a variety of different career pathways. And what was great about it was also having that ability to access content on mobile allowed them more flexibility for where they were learning. So it wasn't just, at this time, it was an in-class program, but there was classroom, there was lab, there was time at home or on the go. So that mobile access was a real benefit, as well as a focus on improving digital literacy skills. This is another adult education program that we've been working with for a few years, and is showing some really strong promise in supporting transitions from traditional ESL programs, and learners are able to access more career pathway focused content. Within this ESOL class, there are individuals who are interested in healthcare pathways, but others who are interested in barbering or accounting or esthetician, that are all CTE programs that are offered at the college. And so within a summer intensive, those students were able to really accelerate their learning, pursue an initial career pathway, and then transition into CTE programs at the college.
So I don't know if we have questions.
There was one question that we didn't get to, but I really encourage people to take advantage of the chat right now. I saw one question that I don't think we answered. It was from Sue Kushner. It says, can you explain how you would work backwards to teach students English? It'd be
Yes.
helpful to see some examples.
So when I talk about working backwards, it starts with what do your students actually need to be able to do in English, and starting with those tasks, and then working backwards to figure out what language they need to accomplish them. So if your students are applying for jobs that need paper applications that need to be filled out, using those paper applications to teach them makes sense, because at the end they'll have had practice with real materials that are relevant to what it is they have to do. Or if your students are struggling because they don't understand the directions they're getting from their supervisors, having them come to class with examples of English that they don't understand so you can help them with what that is. Because language is a skill, it's often little moments like that where the form and the meaning are mapped to an event that happened, where it will trigger their being able to understand that language, and it will result in like a language explosion. Like we still don't know exactly how all of the cognitive complexities that underpin second language acquisition work, but we do know that if it's relevant to their needs and if they need to use the language to do something real, they're much more likely to understand it and remember it and be able to use it. So if you start with what they actually want to be able to do, then you can design your courses around the materials and tasks that they have to do anyway, and give them the language they need to do those things.
Another great example for activities in class that support both language acquisition and digital literacy skills are, job applications are more and more commonly online. So, going through those online forms, the directions, the tasks and steps is a really useful exercise to demonstrate and to go through with your students.
And remembering that adults learn by doing. So filling out job applications live in class in a group, having students take turns sharing their screen while they fill it out, and other students give them information to put in, stopping when there's a question people have about what box to check. All of those things are helpful for language learning, even if there's no space in your curriculum that says, like, fill out job application on Wednesday. Filling out the job application is going to give them practice with all of the language they need to do that particular task, and it extends to others.
One question that came in are what are the best ways to understand occupations that are in demand in a local area? I would go to, the local workforce board. I would imagine that they would post in-demand applications. Even job boards will give you some of that information if you're looking at what jobs are in demand, what jobs, what are the different professions. They can sort out, where the most jobs are in your local area. And it looks like there's a suggestion, the Maryland Workforce Exchange, to get local labor market information. So there's a link in the chat. Let's see if there are any more questions that came in. Don't hesitate to post those questions.
So thank you guys so much. This has been incredibly informative. I just think that the adaptation is really, really relevant to adult learners thinking through their English skills as well as their career goals, and really turning this into not just like a job that would help them, in the temporary, but a career pathway that they can grow within. So I think that that's incredibly valuable. So I want to take a moment, if you guys don't mind, I'm going to put a survey link in the chat box here so that we can get real feedback on how everyone felt the session went. Because like I've been saying all week, we can't grow if we don't know. So the more that we can offer in our virtual training institutes to meet the needs of our instructors and our programs, we really appreciate that. And Katie and Tad have their contact information up here. So if there was something that you're chewing on and you have a question that needs more conversation, please feel free to reach out to them directly to have your questions answered. But I really appreciate everyone's time today. It's really lovely to see this as an option for adult learners and very specified to our population. So thank you guys so much.
Thank you very much for having us. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, we look forward to continuing the conversation. Always interested in kind of brainstorming how to support career pathway programs for English language learners.
Great. Well, happy holidays, everyone. I hope you have a wonderful and hopefully safe season.
Yes.